Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the third book of the Wheel of Time series, the Dragon Reborn. I just finished the Dragon Reborn a few days ago, so my thoughts are still quite fresh. Because I started the first two books before I started the channel, I'm just going to review them real quick, and just so you're up to speed on my thoughts on the series so far. So The Eye of the World was a bit of a struggle for me going in. The writing style of Robert Jordan doesn't really mesh with me. He's very over descriptive. The plot felt very Lord of the Rings-esque, as everybody says, but I was assured that going forward it would kind of lose its Lord of the Rings overt influences and kind of continue on. I was intrigued with the general setup of the story and the world, and there's some characters that I really liked in The Eye of the World, like Lan and Perrin and Moraine, and so I was excited to continue. I did overall end up enjoying The Eye of the World. I gave it about 3.75 to 4-star range, something like that. And then when I moved on to The Great Hunt, I really enjoyed The Great Hunt. I thought that the pace picked up considerably. I had kind of gotten used to Robert Jordan's writing style, and so that was less of a barrier. I also started doing audio for the first time with it, and I would dual read or I would immersion read it, and that really helped as well with Michael Kramer and Kate Redding helping. I thought the character development we got in The Great Hunt and the expansion of the world was very well done. And the ending of The Great Hunt was just explosive, and I really, really enjoyed it. I was so excited while I was reading that last 100 pages or so. I was like, oh man. I think The Great Hunt really won me over for the series, and I was definitely excited to continue. Unfortunately, The Dragon Reborn did not live up to my experiences with the first two books. I ended up having a lot of problems with The Dragon Reborn. I don't think that The Dragon Reborn is a bad book. It just did a number of things that I didn't really like or vibe with. I thought the pace was really slow. It didn't feature Rand almost at all, which is just kind of funny. I get that why I did that. It kind of reminds me of that episode of Community where they tell Abed to take an episode off because he was heavy in the last episode, and then so they don't feature Abed at all in the episode, but he's just in the background helping a woman give birth, and then at the end of the episode he shows up and he's like, I was doing all these things. You didn't notice all the things? I helped a woman give birth. And they're like, no, we didn't notice you. And that's basically Rand in this book, which is fine with me because I don't like Rand that much. He's fine as a protagonist, but I've never really felt invested in him. I have liked the secondary characters more, particularly Perrin. And Perrin's story in this book started off very strong. I would like to end on the positives because I do think that there are positives in this book, and I am excited to continue the Wheel of Time. So I would like to start with the things that I had problems with. Just know that even though it sounds like I'm hating on this book, it was a perfectly fine book. So my first problem with the book is that the way that Robert Jordan writes friendships just drives me crazy. I've never met any group of friends in my life that act the way that these people act. They don't strike me as friends at all. The only person that ever acts like he's actually a friend with people is Rand, who generally does treat his friends very well. But other than that, these people are just not very nice to each other, especially the relationship between the men and the women. Their relationships just don't make sense. To me, they don't feel very authentic. They just bicker constantly and they don't really like each other. There's a point in this book where Matt saves some of the girls and they immediately get angry at him for doing that, to a point that just totally grinded me to a halt in the story. I was just like, hold on, why are they acting this way? This is ridiculous. And it still bothers me now. When I think about it, I'm still like, that scene does not make sense. I don't believe that these people would act this way. It is just super rude to Matt. I just don't find the friendships all that believable. I am told that the bonds between the main characters become more noticeable as you go through the series, and so I'm excited for that to come more to the forefront. But for right now, I just do not buy these characters as people that like each other's company, and that when you're investing so much of the story in these people caring about what's going on with the other people and how that affects them and trying to save other members of their group, the fact that I don't believe their friendships or their bonds is a pretty significant issue in my eyes. Like, I should believe fundamentally that these people want to help each other, and I don't get that from these books as of yet. Another problem I had, which is just a personal problem, is the tons of dreams in this book. I feel like this book was like 1/5 dreams. Robert Jordan is explaining the dream world better now, and I can see that it's kind of its own thing that has intriguing magic rules that I'm interested in exploring. But just generally speaking, dream sequences don't really work for me. I find them really boring. That's just a me thing. So a book populated with tons of dreams is just always going to have moments where I'm just like, pass. Another problem I had with this series is follow-through. This is most prominent in Egwene and Elaine's character development. At the end of the second book, they are basically enslaved, and they have a very traumatic experience, and then they they are saved from that experience. And then in the Dragon Reborn, they're just almost fine. They just barely mention it. They act like the same characters they did before, and that just was really hard for me to accept, because if something that traumatic happened to a person, it would change who they are or how they react to situations. And there was a bit of this later on in the book with Egwene, where she was worried about another person taking her prisoner, and she reacted very strongly to that and was like, I will never be somebody's prisoner again. So it's not as if it was totally dropped. I just don't think it was handled in a way that is true to how a character would actually act after something that traumatic happened. With Elaine, it's a little bit less noticeable because we didn't have as good of a grasp of Elaine's character before it happened. But with Egwene especially, I just feel like she basically just brushed it off for most of this book, and she doesn't really dwell on it. And her personality is exactly the same. She's just moved on from it. And that tends to be a problem that a lot of older fantasy has that I don't usually mesh well with, which is that, oh, in this book they're going to do the thing, but then now that we're on this book, we're done with that. We're completely done with that problem. We're on a new issue. If you've watched the Wheel of Time show, this is actually a major problem I had with the first episode. First episode, spoilers here. Perrin killing his wife, which was completely ridiculous for lots of reasons, setting aside the fridging issue, setting aside how it was just over the top. The level of trauma that Perrin would have to go through is something that would have to be drawn through his arc for the whole series. It would have to constantly be referred to. It would have to inform every decision that they make. They would have to sit down and be like, okay, so Perrin is dealing with trauma from his wife dying. How does that impact this scene? We all have lots of opinions about how the Wheel of Time show worked, but I think we mostly agree that the handling of the Perrin arc was a weaker spot. I think that was a large part of why, which is that they just wanted to be this thing that happened for a couple episodes, and then they just kept going. And in season 4 of the Wheel of Time, are they really going to be thinking about how Perrin's trauma impacted the way that he does things in season 4? And I think the answer is a resounding no. I don't think they're going to be doing that. And so, TV show aside, that is my issue with this book too, which is that I don't feel like Robert Jordan is really digging in each scene and being like, okay, Egwene and Elaine had this traumatizing, terrifying experience. How is that going to affect them in this scene? I feel like he wanted them to get mostly back to baseline, and it's just not something that works for me, generally speaking. I know for some people, they just want the adventure story. They just want people to keep going on and adventuring and saving the world and all of that stuff. And just for me, it doesn't work for me very well to ignore that. Which brings me to another issue, which is just the plot in this one can be pretty ridiculous. I mean, you have these 3 untrained Aes Sedai, and they are the only ones in the whole White Tower that the Amerlin seat can trust to go hunt down these Black Aja, which, I mean, I just don't buy. I just don't buy it at all. And then they go off and try and save Rand, and that makes a little bit more sense to me, but overall, I'm like, why are they being entrusted to do all of this stuff? Why are they not in training? And it just felt very unrealistic to me. Coffee break. Sorry, guys. Another issue I had is the way the male-female relationships are portrayed at all. I mean, you always have a woman being like, men always do this, and then you have men being like, women always do this. And I mean, that's just ridiculous, especially when they just keep repeating it over and over, and they just make all these broad generalizations constantly. If you had a character or two that was like that, and they just had their worldview as like, oh, I think men act this way, or I think women act this way, but you can tell Robert Jordan thinks that men act this way and women act this way, or at least he's creating a world in which he thinks that men act this way and women act this way. And the repetition on this point just really bothers me. And then finally, just the character of Faile, I don't know how to say her name. I'm going to call her Faile because that's what she is as a character. I know a lot of people don't like her. I was probably predisposed to not like her based off seeing the memes and knowing how much fans don't like her. But yeah, she was just a total miss for me from the beginning. I hated everything that she did. I hated all of her dialogue. And beyond that, I feel like she lowers the character of Perrin. Perrin has all this internal conflict that he's trying to figure out. He's a very introspective character that is trying to figure out if he wants to be a warrior or if he wants to be a blacksmith. And him falling for Faile just undermines his whole character arc. It's not believable, which, by the way, Robert Jordan, relationships, terrible. I haven't seen any romance in these books that isn't completely unbelievable yet, and I'm told it even gets worse as we go on, so I'm pumped for that. But yeah, Fail I just did not like at all. I'm told she gets worse going forward, so that will be a struggle. But I did end up liking Perrin's section quite a bit, regardless of the whole Fail stuff. Also, can we just talk about how the ending of these books are extremely repetitive? All three of the endings of these books have been exactly the same so far, and I mean, what are you doing, Rob? Like, why is this happening 3 times in a row? It just felt very repetitive. Also, the villains are just chumps in this series. I don't know if they get better. I'm really hoping they do, because none of these villains are terrifying at all. They're built up to be these like really scary people, and they're like, oh my god, the Fades, and oh my god, Balsamon, and oh my god, Lanfear, and oh my god, the Forsaken, and oh my god, the White Cloaks. And every time these villains are just overhyped, they show up, they fight the good guys, and they're defeated immediately. I mean, there's a point in this book where Moraine just straight murks a guy, which people point out as being a cool moment, but for me, I was like, hold on. This guy was built up as being this crazy strong individual, and Moraine just kills him immediately. To me, that doesn't set up Moraine being really, really great. To me, it shows me that this guy was not that great to begin with, that he was just a chump. A friend of mine mentioned that it seems like the villains of this series are always just this close to slipping on a banana peel whenever they come into contact with our main characters, and I thought that was pretty accurate. Like, they're just fumbling and bumbling because they're by the main characters, and then, oh, this is a main character, I can't beat this guy because he is the protagonist. Quick cut in here just because I forgot to mention that one of the other things about the plot that didn't work for me on this one is just the fact that everybody's going on quests. There's all these quests going on, and it's splitting the party again, which is something that happened in the first and the second book. So again, it speaks to the repetitiveness of this novel and just how everybody is always going off on these side adventures, and it seems like they don't actually ever spend any time together, which goes back into my other problem, which is that these people don't feel like they like each other. I mean, how are they going to really like each other if they never spend any time together, and the time that they do spend together is spent bickering? So yeah, that's just another problem that I had. Sorry to cut in here. So now that we've got all that out of the way, I know it sounds like I'm harping on this book quite a bit, but there are things I really liked. I'm really glad that the secondary characters are starting to get more time to themselves. Matt and Perrin got excellent development in this book. Matt especially, I felt, went from basically a nobody to actually having his own personality. He's very funny. And that point where he's on the roof, and then there's like all these other people showing up on the roof, and he's like, how many people can show up on this roof? I just thought that was hysterical. I can totally see Matt becoming my favorite character as we go on, and so I'm really happy that he got more of that development. Same with Perrin. I really like Perrin, and the scene where he gets the hammer from the blacksmith I thought was excellent. That was one of my favorite scenes in the series so far. And, I'm really excited to see how Perrin evolves. So I'm really glad that these characters got more time. The girls also got quite a bit of development. I mentioned some of my problems with that before, but overall, I still think that they are more well-developed characters and fleshed out. And the world that Robert Jordan has made is becoming more and more broad. We're seeing more of the cultures. We're seeing how all these things interact. I mean, the Aiel are super interesting. Every scene with the Aiel I really liked, and I'm excited to learn more about the Aiel. I'm starting to look at this series a lot like I look at my favorite TV series, The Wire. The Wire follows a different aspect of the city of Baltimore each season, and in the second season, famously, it kind of diverts away from the main characters and it does all this other stuff. And a lot of people at the time did not like that, and they were like, wait, why are we developing all this other stuff? But then you watch the whole thing and you're like, oh, it was impossible for us to get to the end here without setting up all this stuff in the second season. And that's how I'm going to look at The Dragon Reborn. It was not my favorite novel to read. I couldn't imagine rereading it unless I really end up loving the series and want to give the whole series a reread. But that being said, the development and so much stuff that happened in this book I think is going to make the rest of the series even more memorable. I'm going to understand the characters better. I'm going to understand the world better. I'm going to understand the magic better. And so it's going to really allow me to appreciate the stuff that happens further on in the series now that The Dragon Reborn did all of that legwork. Also, I just have to talk real quickly about Matt's special powers. I don't know how they're going to develop. He seems to just get extra lucky, which is a really cool power. I think it was foreshadowed really well because in the scene where he makes a bet on whether or not he can beat the two brothers in combat with the staff, he just completely murks them. And I was like, this is impossible. These guys are training to be warders, and this is just this random dude from a village. And I was really upset. And at the time, that would have been in my negatives. But then later on, as you start realizing what's going on with Matt and how his magic seems to be tied with betting, then I'm like, oh, they foreshadowed that really effectively with this moment. You're supposed to think that this moment is ridiculous, and it's supposed to trigger something in your mind so that you're like, wait a second, this something isn't quite adding up. And so I did like all of that. I'm really intrigued where all of the Matt stuff goes. Overall, I came about middle of the road for the Dragon Reborn. It is not a bad book whatsoever. I can see why it's some people's favorites. There's a lot of really good character development that happens here, but there is some writing style choices and just some character choices and some plot choices that made me like it less than the other two. But I'm going into The Shadow Rising optimistic. I'm really excited. People say that's one of the best Wheel of Time books. I'll try not to pull a Petrick and get overhyped for The Shadow Rising and then not like it. I'll try to make sure that I don't get too hyped on it. But I am really excited to continue. I ended up giving The Dragon Reborn a 5.5 out of 10, which is about average. It's a little bit better than an average book, but I could see myself going back and retroactively increasing the rating after I get further on in the series and see all the things that the Dragon Reborn is setting up. Okay, that was my thoughts on the Dragon Reborn. I hope you enjoyed. What did you think about the Dragon Reborn? Is it one of your favorite Wheel of Time books? Is it one of your least favorites? What do you think about the Wheel of Time in general? Do you completely disagree with me? Do you think that some of the things I didn't like are some of your favorite things, or vice versa? Please let me know what you think about the Dragon Reborn. And like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thank you all so much for watching. It's never goodbye. It's just till next time. Take it easy, everybody.